afternoon, everyone. I'm Molly the Kush RN, and you've reached Conversations with Kush. Today, I have an incredible guest for you, Dr. Codi Peterson, who is a pediatric pharmacist. He works in an emergency room, and he is the Chief Science Officer of Canigma, amongst other things. Codi, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me, Molly. It's been a while since
Yeah,
we've bumped into each
yeah,
other.
it has. We met at the ACNA, the American Cannabis Nurses Association conference, almost 2 years ago now. So I'm looking forward to
Hmm.
seeing you hopefully in 2025 again. I
Maybe.
know you have a lot of things going on. You have so much on your docket. So we're always blessed to have you in our space. So
Thanks, Molly.
um, tell me a little bit more about who you are, what you do, what you're involved with.
By night, I'm a hospital pharmacist, and I mean that literally. I work night shift in the emergency department. So, I mean, I'm, still practicing in the traditional sense of pharmacy. Then, learning that cannabis was medicine going back all the way 2008, 2009. Being really impressed with how it helped a loved one of ours pass with cancer, with dignity and sort of happiness. That was in college, and I'm in pharmacy school, and I kind of stashed that knowledge with me. I continue to have an affinity towards the plant, what have you. But it wasn't really until 2019 that I was at my current employer, and I learned they were going to add tuition reimbursement. And since I had to take out hundreds of thousands of dollars to become a pharmacist, I had no interest in burning any more money to get an education. Of course,
Relatable.
my employer, yeah. So my employer basically says I'm going to cover all or next to all of your education, which changed my mind. But what do I want to study, right? I'm a pharmacist. I've already got my doctorate. What do I want to do? Literally that day, serendipitously as that may sound, is my best friend from the East Coast calls me. He's like, "Hey, I'm driving down the highway, saw a billboard says Masters in Cannabis. I thought of you immediately." And it was the same day that
Awesome.
the tuition reimbursement had changed and blah blah blah. So long story short, I ended up applying to the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy program, which is their medical cannabis science and therapeutics master's degree. I got that in 2022, and I'm just out here throwing knowledge. Hopefully, some of it sticks. Trying to learn as much as I can and support really a nascent, growing industry.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for that work. We we can we align in that I work in the emergency department too. So I'm a
Hmm,
registered nurse. Yeah, and I work
I didn't know
nights.
that. Oh, look at
Yeah.
that! No wonder we get along.
For sure. So one of the things I really wanted you to come on and talk about today was CHS, which is cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which is something that we see quite often in the emergency department. So talk a little bit about that. I would love to hear you getting into the science of it a bit. I talked briefly about it on a show that I had a couple weeks back, and I just want to make sure that I'm capturing all the aspects of it so that people really understand. So kind of go in depth a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I think what's important to start with the beginning is we don't know as much about this condition, this syndrome, as we'd like. I think the second thing to point out, based on my what my ears are telling me, is I have two English bulldogs with pitter pattery feet, but they are not light. So if you hear or even see English bulldogs running around, know that they're not feral. They're actually owned by those. And they
Awesome.
sound feral. They definitely sound feral. Anyway, uh, so I see cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, CHS, in the hospital as well. A lot of people are wondering what CHS might be. There's not a great definition, but generally speaking, we would call them cycles of intense nausea and vomiting in patients who are typically using cannabis regularly, around daily, sometimes a little less, usually a little bit more, and is characterized by intense nausea and vomiting that is refractory, resistant to standard nausea medicines, not
Okay.
associated with anything else. Right before we give you this cannabis related vomiting, we try to rule everything else out, And the
Like
last thing to note,
pregnancy
pregnancy,
or
gastroenteritis, an infection, appendicitis, a
right,
burst, a stomach ulcer. There's a million things that you could rule out, which is what makes this condition one of the challenging things to do. Is it's a
for sure.
diagnosis of exclusion. You must check or you write a list of everything you think it can be and cross out all the ones that it's not based on the tests you did. And if CHS remains on your list, that's probably what you have. So there are a lot of diseases like this. More than a couple is what I should say. Some of them might be like an Alzheimer's disease or something like that, where you're forgetting things and we don't know why.
Right,
Autoimmune diseases like fibromyalgia. Well, that's a pain disorder, but some autoimmune diseases and some pain disorders like fibromyalgia, where there's no like one place to look to call this fibromyalgia. You kind of have to check off all the other potential causes of the pain. Anyway, I
right,
digress. Getting back to the point, repeated cycles of intense nausea and vomiting that doesn't respond to typical medicines and often will respond at home to hot baths and showers. Now, that's not 100%, but many patients afflicted with CHS, those suffering with CHS, do report that a hot bath or a hot shower, scalding hot, is the only thing that can temporarily relieve their pain. Now that's a really
right.
interesting finding, and now you
Agreed.
probably know. Yeah, we don't know why. It probably has something to do with the way your endocannabinoid system, the system on which THC interacts, is probably somehow out of balance or inappropriately working. And one of its jobs is thermostat. It kind of keeps your body temperature regulated or tells your body that
Mm,
it is at a regular temperature. So when we introduce THC, a lot of THC, it seems throwing that thermostat off and people feel unwell. So by getting in the hot bath, it seems to equilibrate the thermostat to the
okay.
desire. But the
Interesting.
problem is you
Okay.
can't really live in a hot bath. I mean, you can
Yeah.
try. You get really pruny after just a few hours. Hot showers probably great for 30 or 40 minutes, but if you start adding up the water, and if you have any, connection to nature,
Problems.
you're probably already starting to feel guilty about that. So
Or
it's
if you
not
have problems
great.
with your blood pressure.
Oh, huge. Actually, it's not uncommon to see patients who, because of the condition, because of the hot showers, their blood pressure is shifting. They get lightheaded in the shower, fall over. Now they've got a bump on their head, and we're trying to figure out why they're vomiting.
Right.
Bumps on head can cause vomiting. So then it's like a
Concussions. Yeah.
challenging circumstance, but absolutely it can have an effect on blood pressure. Many patients report getting too lightheaded to enjoy the shower for too long. Big challenges. Showers not the solution, but it is a really interesting component. Um, yeah, and I'll just leave it at that. So, chronic cannabis use, usually more than a year, usually, although not exclusively, daily or more, followed and characterized sort of CHS, the definition is these intense repeating episodes of nausea vomiting.
Right.
So what me and my group of scientists and teammates are trying to do is we're trying to better understand how much, how often, what type of cannabis are you using, right? We're trying to help doctors better predict if this is happening. So how are you smoking? How are you vaping? How are you dabbing? How much? And then
Okay.
ask them, what symptoms did you have when this all started? And then to the second layer to that is, yes, we know you're nausea and vomiting. The research team that I'm working with is interested in understanding better what were the symptoms that were sort of nagging you over the course of the weeks and months leading up to this nausea. We call that the prodromal symptoms. And by
Okay.
we, I'm talking about scientists, we mean prodromal just means sort of like the precondition, the pre-characterized syndrome. So before you get poison ivy and walking through the woods and you get the big blisters, you get little blisters and just a little tingly feeling, but you know that it's going to be poison ivy
Full
if you've gotten it
blown.
before.
Yeah.
And that's because you've got a bit of a prodromal symptom as opposed to the full on symptom. So that's the word we're using. We're trying to better understand prodrome symptoms. We're trying to understand use patterns. understand burden on the healthcare system because
Yeah.
you've seen this, I've seen this. 7, 8, 9 visits to the hospital before we
Right.
figure out. I mean, that's on the high end, but still 2, 3, 4 visits to the hospital almost for everybody before we really piece this together because it's a diagnosis of exclusion. We have to go
Right.
through all the tests for everything else. And teasing all that apart can be challenging. So there's burdens on the patients, burden on the healthcare system, and so many
Yeah.
things we still need to know.
As many things are in the emergency department, and I think that's the frustrating thing because when clinically, as a clinical observation, when people come in, they think they are dying. And and I have to believe them, right? Their pain is such that it is very bad and nothing helps other than those warm baths or showers. So typically what we do is go through that series of questions, and then give IV fluids. And now the new treatment is droperidol. So, and I can't, do you see, I'm sure you don't see much of this in the
Oh,
ER
I
where you
do.
work. You do?
I see
Okay.
this in children. I
Okay.
do.
Okay. Okay.
14, 15, 16, 17. I've seen it in that
Okay.
whole range, usually 15, 16, 17, right? And towards
Sure.
the end. But yeah, I do see
It,
children, if we want to call them that, late teenagers, developing this vomiting disorder from what's at least our best guess overconsumption of THC rich products.
okay. Is there an association with high dose products? Because I'm wondering if like dabbing or high percentage THC plays a factor in that at all.
This is grossly understudied, and we don't have very much good data.
Okay.
Anecdotally, or sort of from the cuff, that probably makes sense. There hasn't been like if you do dabs, then you're definitely getting this, and if you smoke, you definitely aren't. That has not played out. There are individuals who smoke only. There are individuals who dab only. There are individuals who even just take edibles only who have
Okay.
reported developing this condition. So it's probably not likely related to a route of sorry, it might be correlated to certain routes of administration more, but it is not selective for just inhalation or just edibles. And there's a lot of questions around still, once again, what's the real cause of this disorder? And because of that, Dr. Ethan Russo, who you've heard of, I'm sure,
Of course.
Dr. Ethan Russo is a big name in cannabis science, and he worked on a project with Len May and Endocanna DNA. So Dr. Russo and Endocanna DNA got together. They did a series of patients who asked people to submit their DNA if they had CHS and fill out a survey. And then
Okay.
then we had a control, individuals who just smoked marijuana but didn't get the vomiting. And then they
Okay.
compared them genetically and they found 6 unique markers that were only
Oh,
seen in the individuals with CHS,
okay,
and not
great.
in the individuals without it. So right now, leading theories suggest there's likely a consumption component. Are you dabbing? How often are you dabbing? Are you just smoking and only at night and blah blah blah? Like figuring out how much, how often, what route a little. But then the other side is this also genetic condition? So like some of us just aren't built to smoke like Snoop, like we can't do
Yeah,
our body doesn't process the molecules in cannabis, which THC is an amazing medicine, right?
it
But it's
is. Yeah.
also a pretty good plant defense. I mean, the cannabis plant pumps it
Hmm.
out for a reason. It's probably trying to protect from sun, protect from pests, protect from viruses. And so, like, if you think about it in that way, like that we're smoking the plant's sunscreen or the plant's
Exactly.
insecticide,
The
all of a sudden you
trichomes,
can be like,
right?
oh, I do see how like maybe like too much of this could eventually, especially when you think, oh, it also changes the way I think and feel every time I touch it. Like it's pretty powerful
Yeah.
that it's not unreasonable to think that we could find an adverse effect from THC, from cannabis. And do I think we have this condition figured out? Hell no, I'm doing research
Yeah.
that I think we have to use to figure it out. But I can assure you it's real. I can assure you it is associated with smoking marijuana products because once patients quit after a few months, not right away, because they don't feel better right away, after they quit in a few months, the overwhelming majority of them have no more nausea and vomiting.
Is it only with the chemovar type 1 then, or does it also come into play with a type 2 and a type 3?
Right. So THC rich products versus type 2, CBD, THC balance, and type 3. Loaded question.
Okay.
If you looked at the statistical associations, it is a strong and clear connection between type 1's high THC cannabis products and this condition, period.
Okay. Okay.
However, there are case reports, there are anecdotal reports, and some reason to believe that this is not THC hyperemesis syndrome,
Mm,
but rather cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And here's a
okay.
couple reasons why. Number one, patients who are consuming or who have been consuming spice or K2, which is a generic word for a big class of synthetic cannabinoids that bear no structural resemblance to what the plant did, but pharmacologically does quite similar things.
Okay.
So if you look at some patients that have consumed spice, become addicted to it, or used it regularly, they can develop CHS. Okay, so
Okay.
now it's not just this one plant molecule. Now it's this other molecule. Okay. Second thing, recent case report this year. A little kid on a ketogenic diet. It means all his calories come from fat, 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 fat. Because
Right.
turns out when we do that, we can reduce seizure activity. No
Okay.
sugar, all fat. It works really good. In fact, it's the oldest known treatment for epilepsy.
Okay.
Um, the ketogenic diet works great. Now, a patient who is still having seizures on a ketogenic diet got it added to Epidiolex, which is pharmaceutical CBD. Okay, follow me on this story. You're gonna have to.
I got you. I'm right
This
there.
patient who's on the pharmaceutical CBD and the keto diet. Remember, keto diet's fat only, so a lot of CBD in the belly is getting absorbed because it likes to follow fat around the body.
Exactly. Lipophilic.
Titrated up to the largest dose of just CBD. It is THC free, but really high dose is 20 per kilo. So for let's say an average sized adult, you're talking about multiple grams, thousands of milligrams of CBD a day.
Right.
So the patient's on the keto diet, taking this large dose, starts to develop the nausea and vomiting condition that we
Mm,
believe. And they had
okay.
no THC. They're not a smoker. They're a chronically ill patient with chronic epilepsy, but they developed uncontrollable refractory nausea while taking large doses of CBD.
Mm,
So there's an argument to be made that that's a good, just one, so obviously not that proof, but there's good evidence that, hey, there's something else going on here. Plus, patients with CHS, if they take a CBD product, it can set them into a flare. So
gotcha.
there's reason to believe that it's not just THC, and there's reason to believe that CBD anyway ain't the solution.
Yeah. Hmm. Man, there's so much that we're learning every day, right? And so much more to learn. It's
For better or
fascinating.
worse, yeah. I think
Yeah,
this condition needs more focus, needs more awareness, and needs more, I'm gonna say, like, acceptance and forgiveness. I mean,
agreed.
we as an industry are really tough on these individuals. And remember, I
Agreed.
just described this probably people who love this plant, smoke it every day, and just have genetic disposition to not be
Right.
able to house it. And that's unfortunate that we would alienate, tell them they're liars, tell them their weed is tainted. There's all sorts of shit that has these individuals have gone through. And I think it's a real shame. I think we should, as an industry, be supporting them and saying, hey, we have this amazing plant. Look at how many people it helped. And let's remember to treat it with respect, and not everyone's the same, and blah, blah, blah.
Not just the industry, but healthcare
Oh,
workers,
big
right?
time. Oh,
Yeah. So
totally.
yeah.
And
I mean,
the
I've
industry has
I've
its own
seen
problems with CHS, but you're spot on. Please tell me what you've
yeah.
seen.
Well, just that, people will come in and it's the whole, because a lot of times people are vocalizing, their pain. And so people, you get the whole eye roll and they're like, oh, they smell like weed and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, we need to kind of start, breaking that down a bit, that stigma, like these people are using this as their medicine. This to them is their medicine. This is what gets them up in the morning. This is what helps them focus on their work. This is what helps them have good interactions with the people around them, whether they're a parent or a daughter or a son or
Right. Helps
whatever
them
it is.
continue to be able to take care of their loved one.
exactly.
Like
So I
provide
think
food for their family. There's a plenty of examples. Yeah.
exactly. So I'm always curious as to like what words do we use as healthcare workers to kind of, kind of tapping that down a little bit and be like, hey guys, let's relax. Like this person has pain just like the person next to them has pain. So let's treat them with kindness and respect and dignity, and
Totally.
try to get to
Now,
their issue.
admittedly, this is probably where our hospital experience deviate a little bit, right? Dealing with kids who developed a vomiting
Right.
condition or in pain versus dealing with, admittedly gross adults who've developed a condition. There is a different. This is one of the reason I work in pediatrics because
Yeah.
I don't have as much empathy for big adult humans as I do for little ones.
Yeah, it's tough
But
some days.
yeah, yeah. So I think my point to that is yes, we should be showing patients with grace. They don't have to be a super stoner to develop this condition, right? It
Exactly.
seems to be associated, but that doesn't mean everybody walking through your door. Another thing that I see is I'm seeing a lot of patients have trouble get diagnosed, like 3, 4, 5 visits because they didn't tell their doctor they were smoking marijuana. Is sometimes the problem, right? It's only when we accidentally get urine to rule out something else, and we're like, "Wait, there's THC in here. You didn't mention that, kid." They're like, "Oh yeah,
Right.
it's just all day, every day."
Right. Just in the morning when I wake up every
Yeah, it's
day.
just as soon as I wake up in the rest of the day. That's it. Not even when I'm sleeping. um,
Oh, too funny.
so definitely there is some grace. The flip side to that 4 visit, takes forever to figure it out, is I'm nauseous or vomiting and I smoke marijuana. Light bulb goes off in the young and experienced or whatever physician's head. They look at the other major problems. Sometimes we have a cognitive bias to put people to essentially stereotype, right? But in this case, it's a
Right.
patient, but not based on race, but based on condition, presentation. How do they look?
Exactly.
Oh, I know what this looks like. Put it in the CHS bucket and move on through the ED. I gotta move patients, right? I gotta get people in. I
Right.
gotta get people out. There's a business to run. So because of all that, I do see some degree of overdiagnosis as well. Some degree, not
Mm,
a lot, right? It's not
okay.
happening all the time, but I have seen patients who I believe have been inappropriately placed in the bucket with, they've got a weed problem and they've developed their vomiting because of this,
Sure.
and it's just been not true, right? So there
Yeah.
are examples where physicians are over diagnosing, but there are examples where they're underdiagnosing, missing this because it is not something a lot of people know about, whether the physician or the
Sure.
patient.
I think
So we get both of it.
you're fortunate enough to work and live in a state where the knowledge about cannabis, especially amongst healthcare providers, is a lot more vast than where I live. Like it's pretty new in Minnesota, So I think when people come in, they're just like, "Yep, we have to do this $1 million workup to see why this person's vomiting." So there's a CT, there's all these meds that they give, and then it comes down to, well, okay, maybe it's more related to their THC
Mhm.
consumption. But the point being is that we need more knowledge amongst our providers, and so I'm hoping I'm trying to get the word out, like hey, there's a lot that you probably don't know. It doesn't mean that you're ignorant. It just means that there's a lot of new research that's come out. I think a lot of the research that has been done thus far is from a lens of like how is THC bad for you versus how can it harm you. So there's that whole dynamic that's going on too. So like as we hopefully well we will reschedule but hopefully deschedule cannabis, that research will open up and we can find out more things and be more well informed about this plant medicine. So
Right, and develop tests to help, identify it, right? If
absolutely.
you could, if like all those other tests you order to rule out all the other conditions, if we could find a way to correlate a blood marker or correlate somehow a measurement to say, oh, you've developed this inappropriate vomiting disorder secondary to your cannabis use, that
Right.
would reduce 3 or 4 ED visits. That would help
Exactly.
definitively say it because a lot of the problem, admittedly, with all the challenges we get diagnosing, A lot of the problem is your patient accepting their diagnosis.
That too.
A lot of cannabis users don't want to be told they've developed an intolerance to the plant and they're going to have to abstain for the next 6 months, period. That's
Right.
a really hard thing to say, especially if it's all the things you just described. This plant helps them get up in the morning. This plant helps them deal with debilitating pain. It helps them tolerate any of the million things that could make life really goddamn hard on this planet.
Right.
And like maybe they even develop a dependence on it. They depend
Mm.
on it to help get them through their challenging world. And that is
Exactly.
okay. Now imagine someone takes that and rips it away from you and says, aha, all that benefit you've been getting, now you feel 10 times worse and you no longer have that tool. It's a lot
Mm.
for people to take. The
Yes,
second
it
thing I want to
is.
say about that, about people not believing their diagnosis, is the human brain is conditioned to believe that what it ate is causing vomiting. I'll give you an
Mm.
example. When you're getting chemotherapy, often physicians recommend don't have your favorite food because if you eat a food after chemo and then you later are hit with food aversion or vomiting and nausea secondary to all of this, the brain says, what did I eat to make my belly feel bad? And it will evolutionarily connect these two. So if people eat their favorite food whilst they're getting chemo, they have food aversion, they no longer enjoy their favorite food. You've heard of this, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was pregnant, I had hyperemesis syndrome and
Okay.
related to
Hyperemesis
pregnancy.
gravidarum, not
Yes,
cannabinoid
perfect.
hyperemesis. Yep.
Exactly. And I ate green peppers on my pizza, and for 10 years I didn't eat green peppers after that. So
But
yes,
that
I
was
know exactly what
always
you're
your
talking about.
go-to.
I mean, it was definitely one of them, something I enjoyed. So yeah.
Yeah. That's an example of like food memory. And so our brains, especially because most of what comes out of our belly went in through our mouth, right? Our brains, when we get sick in our belly, like to associate it with whatever we ate last. I'll give you an example. Like my first time getting drunk was like a banana artificial rum. And I got to be honest, I still to this day, it's been 20 years, I want pretty much nothing to do with artificial banana anything. And that's just one example, but you can find them down the line. Oh, I once ate this, it was so traumatic I won't eat again, right? So like the brain associates the uncomfortable, the negative experience with what you ate. But in the case of marijuana and cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, I say marijuana, but it could be, I should be saying cannabis. It's just a little more clear. It's high THC marijuana, and
That's okay.
technically the U.S. federal government's definition. So I'm not going to get too worked up about it. But
Yeah.
one thing that I think is important to note is uh, that there's no immediate response. There's no immediate vomiting second. You don't smoke and get nauseous. You smoke and you actually feel less nauseous. And it's only a day or 2 days or into the future later that you get hit with a cycle, a bout of emesis. And so
Sure.
there is no immediate feedback for the brain to say, I've smoked that, I felt funny, now I'm not going to do that anymore. In fact, it says,
Sure.
I used that, I felt better. Oh, I'm vomiting in the morning. I should use that thing again that made me feel better. And this is what patients often do, even though they're sort of giving themselves a dose of the same thing that's exacerbating their
Mm.
problem, but it's
Mm.
not as straightforward because you don't feel immediately nauseous when you inhale.
Gotcha.
It's into
Okay.
the
Okay.
future. The second thing
Sure.
is when you quit, it doesn't stop right away. So
Mm.
patients will quit smoking today, what's today, Wednesday, and then have another bout of emesis on Saturday. And they say, "Oh,
Mm.
it's not the reefer," like
Yeah. Yeah.
then
Yeah.
they're gonna move about their day. But that's not what's happening. There's an imbalance in the homeostatic regulatory system that we all have, our endocannabinoid system. There's some sort of imbalance in that balance because of the broad role of your ECS throughout the day and throughout your cycle and your circadian rhythm. There's no association here. And so it's really hard for people to understand that if they quit, let's say the doctor convinced them to quit, convinced them they have CHS and they vomit a week later, they're going to say, unless that doctor knew that and informed them, and they don't, they they're gonna think that this has nothing to do with the weed,
Okay.
right? And so there's a lot of challenge areas, the speed bumps, pitfalls, whatever we have going on here.
So part of the teaching is also going to have to be like, hey, let's take a look at your diet. Let's take a look at your exercise. Let's take a look at your spiritual practices, all those other things that help balance out your endocannabinoid system.
I
And
love
then
that.
always,
Just
yeah,
took that right
right.
out of
And
my pocket, and I didn't even show my cards yet.
and then going forward and being like, hey, this could happen for a while. So this is something that you're going to have to like learn to live without for a time. But I've always gotten really good benefit out of taking tea breaks sometimes. And so maybe if you can kind of present that information too, like you might learn a few things about yourself. And if you
Yeah.
can balance out the other things going on in your body, once you do kind of reintroduce that cannabis again, it might work better.
And here's how I tell kids, and yes, kids for me. Look, you gotta stop. You gotta cold turkey, man up, whatever dumb word you want to say. It's time to stop. However,
Yeah.
I don't know what the future holds for you. And I don't know what your malfunction is today and how your body will change and whatever. So if you can give me 6 months of no cannabis, here's a couple things that I can promise you. Number one, it's gonna suck, okay? But it's only gonna really suck for the first week, okay? After that, it just starts to become normal. In fact, after the first week, you're probably gonna start to feel more like you. You're gonna start to, feel a little more regular. Then your belly pain's gonna go away. All those problems that I'm trying to investigate, those symptoms, those prodromal symptoms, those will fade. Your vomiting episodes will go from every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks to every once, or none. And all of a sudden, the sky is brighter, the birds chirp better, and everything. And
Hmm.
you're going to see that those 6 months actually fly by. And then, if you want to reintroduce cannabis, and I only mean if you choose and you're of legal consenting age, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
Um, if you choose to go back, I need you to know that one, you're never going to be able to smoke like you did. Never. I don't think that your body will ever tolerate what you've been doing here today, and I have no evidence to suggest that it will.
Mm.
However, I do have some evidence, anecdotally, that some individuals can go back and consume with some degree of regularity without ever going into an episode, and who get very clear warning signs telling their body that they need to stop, and they often can. And they live their lives not abstinent, but rather conscious and, like,
Mm.
thoughtfully consuming. And I do believe there's a potential for thoughtful consumption in the future of these patients, but I do not believe that they can fall back into sort of the cannabis use patterns that they currently have. And that's held up for the vast majority of patients I've talked to. But look, this disease occurs on a spectrum. Some
Sure.
individuals, they smell it in their house because the neighbor, is smoking in their house and it drifted in the window and they're vomiting. They're just
Sure.
horrible, this memory. Other individuals, on the weekends they'll smoke, or some individuals, as unsafe and as much as I don't advise it, they just deal with it. They vomit sometimes and they try to temper their use and they can't quit.
Mm.
um, there's a whole spectrum of people out there, and
Sure.
there's a whole spectrum of relationships with cannabis. Those that it's like,
Absolutely.
nobody could ever get addicted to weed. I could never do this other than on the weekends, or some people who can't do it at all. And then you've got
Mhm.
people all the way over here who's like, I can't go through a quarter of a day without smoking a blunt because weed makes everything better and blah blah blah. And
Right.
both of those people are entitled to their opinions.
They sure are.
Both of them should recognize that cannabis is an excellent medicine. It also is mildly addicting, and everything in between. All think both can be true,
100%. 100%. That's one of the things I hope that the show really brings forward is that we're all entitled to develop our own relationship with cannabis, and there's no judgment as to how you're using yours and I'm using mine. Like
There
it's wide
shouldn't be
open.
anyway.
There
Yeah,
shouldn't be.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
and
for
and
sure.
it's so hyper customizable to your needs and your preferences.
Mhm.
Like some of us just have different livers than others, so we can't. Edibles
Right.
don't do the same things, right? Some of us have different pain needs, different life circumstances. If you're a stewardess working on an airplane, you don't have the option to be smoking weed every 4
Right.
hours, you know?
Well, even myself, I mean, I'm a nurse, so I'm not
Yeah,
an
it's a
everyday
good example.
consumer. Yeah, and the days that I work, I don't consume cannabis unless it's after work and I'm winding down and I'm getting ready to go to bed, that kind of thing. But you just have to, just like any other like alcohol, right? That's poisonous, actually. Um, we get to choose how we consume it, and we have to do it in a responsible way. So,
I love that. I agree that
um,
alcohol is poisonous. Anything is poisonous at the right dose, but the difference is the effective dose to enjoy alcohol is ridiculously large compared to
right,
THC. So,
for
and
sure.
just for the viewers, not for you,
Yeah.
uh, it's something like 10 milligrams of THC. In order to get an equivalent buzz on alcohol, you'd have to do something like 50 grams, so 50,000 milligrams, which is that
Mm,
5,000 more. So it's pretty
yeah.
insane.
So before we run out of time, thank you again for your time. Please tell my listeners where they can find you and find all this great information.
Well, first of all, listeners, if you have CHS or anyone you know believes they may have CHS, we are doing research right now. It's coming out around the time of this podcast. We want to get you to sign up. So I want you to check it out. I don't have a living space for that website for the study. I'm happy to share it here with Molly and put it in the show
Yep,
notes.
we can put that in.
But really, Instagram and LinkedIn is where I spend most of my time. On my team is Megan, trusted Canna nurse. We've got Riley,
Awesome.
Cannabicam, and a few other really bright, Jill Simonian, Jacqueline Higgins, and Katie. Oh shoot, I can't think of Katie's last name. Sorry, Katie. But know that we've got a whole team of people interested in doing this and building this out. You can follow any of those individuals, or if you do on your socials, we're going to see posts about this. Find me on LinkedIn, Codi Peterson, or on Instagram, Cannabis Farm D. I will be posting about this. I want you to learn more. We need to learn more. Help us learn more.
Help us help you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you again for your time, Cody. I really appreciate it. Thank you for that information. I hope it will be useful to the audience. Everyone, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to follow Cody and the great things that he's doing.
MBC. No relation to NBC.